Greetings from New York City and Columbia Business School Executive Education. I'm Scott Gardner and I'm very happy to welcome you to the first of 4 webinars that we'll be hosting over the next 2 days. I'd also like to send a special welcome to those of you who are watching this live stream webinar today from the 2018 Association for Talent Development International Conference and Expo in San Diego, California. Now, before I introduce Professor Jeremy Kagan and today's webinar, Marketing Strategy for New Ventures, Operationalizing Your Growth Plans, I'd like to go over just a few key logistics. As always, a recording will be made available after the webinar. If you'd like to tweet about the webinar, please use our hashtag CBSExecEd. And as always, we encourage you to upload your questions to the Q&A box, and we'll get to as many of those as possible in the last 10 minutes. Great. Jeremy, it's great to be with you here today. Jeremy wears many hats at Columbia Business School. He's an Adjunct Professor of Business in the Marketing Department, the Managing Director of the Eugene Lang Entrepreneur Center, as well as an alum of the MBA program. And in the last week and a half, a new book has been written, Digital Marketing Strategy and Tactics. Jeremy, it's great to be with you today. I'll join you in the last 10 minutes.
Thanks.
The floor is yours.
My mom's very happy about the book. She now knows what I do for a living. So.
That's great. Welcome.
Excellent. Well, today we're going to be talking about marketing strategy for new ventures. And one of the key things here is linking your metrics to the operational decisions you need to make when you're running a startup. Now, many people don't realize that there's really 3 phases of a business when you're thinking about the startup's life cycle. The first phase is what we've really seen popularized around the lean startup movement, finding product market fit. And that is a great and important part of that. We teach that at our own school. But what we're going to look at today is really the second phase. The second phase is when you're searching for a repeatable, scalable business model for growth. And then once you've got that, it's really all about scaling the business, traditional management problems. So we're going to focus on the middle. And really the key there is determining what metrics you need to measure for success. So when you're looking at a brand new startup that's looking at customer development, one of the real challenges is finding out ways to measure customer engagement. These are the most important metrics at that stage. When you're at a growth stage, however, the most important thing is actually figuring out how to efficiently grow. In other words, marketing efficiency. So the key metrics at that all-important stage of hyper-growth are going to all be around the things that really can determine efficient and effective growth to scale. Ultimately, all businesses really need to be here. They have to have a cost to acquire a customer that is lower than the lifetime value of that customer. Now, this may sound really simple, but the challenge is if you're a new business, you really have no idea what that lifetime is going to be. If you haven't sold anything to anyone yet, how many times are they going to come back? How long will they stick with you? You really just don't know. So in many cases, this is a process of experimentation and testing that leads a lot of startups to growth decisions that they need to do in somewhat of an uncertain environment. And what we're looking here is to figure out what's going to affect all of these things. So the things that can drive customer acquisition cost are numerous. It can be your business model. Are you going to sell using a crazy viral video, which might be very low cost for attracting customers? Or are you going to dig down deep and have a very complex sales process involving lots of highly paid sales executives and a long, maybe months or even year-long process for closing a contract? Both of these decisions, while seemingly just about the business itself, can have a real impact on the operations you're going to be going through for that business as you grow. And on the other side of things, looking at your lifetime value, it's important to think about how you're going to monetize. Is this an infrequent purchase or something that people are going to buy every month? Is it possible to get them to upgrade and buy a more expensive product or expand their purchase and buy more? All of these things are going to affect that very critical balance. So, depending on where we are in that process, we're going to need to determine all these little numbers along the marketing funnel that will turn out to be our key performance indicators, the metrics we care about at the growth stage of the company. Now, these metrics, in turn, will funnel directly into specific decisions about our operational growth. Let's dig in a little bit. What we see right now is a representation that we're all very familiar with of the marketing funnel, going from awareness and consideration to developing a preference for a product, taking action and buying that product, and even becoming a loyal customer. Luckily, in digital, we can even dig down further and generate some love for our advocates and really spread the word using influencers. But the most important thing is we can map each of these to very specific digital channels for growth. And as we do walk down that funnel, there'll be performance indicators along the way that can help us determine and make operational decisions for our business's future. Let's take a look at walking backwards through the funnel math here. Ultimately, what's amazing about this marketing problem is it's really a math problem. Now, what you're seeing here is a typical way to progress through a marketing funnel. Let's say that we generate a bunch of leads, and almost 20% of them decide to come before us and maybe become part of our marketing process. These marketing qualified leads then are talked to by our sales force, maybe learn more about the product, and a full 80% of them are accepted into the sales process and go to contract. At that point, perhaps we close as much as a quarter of these opportunities. Once those opportunities become customers and close deals, 20% of them move along the funnel. This sounds like a really reasonable approach, but what you'll notice at each of these gates is there's really a numbers game playing out. If we in fact are targeting to get that one closed deal, we need to have 5 opportunities make it to that final stage. And if in fact we want those 5 opportunities that will lead to that deal, we need 20 leads to be accepted by our sales team, and so on and so forth. 25 of those initial raw leads need to become marketing qualified leads, and so on. What we're looking at here then is, in order to feed the machine of growth that we're trying to build, we need to have a pretty large number of leads coming in the top. And that, in essence, is our marketing challenge. So let's take a look at this, how we look at it to operationalize all this for growth. We don't just come up with this in a vacuum, after all. What we're looking is to drive marketing campaigns that will lead to these numbers resulting in our financial projections. It sounds simple, it should be a math problem, but we're predicting the future. We don't know exactly what those numbers are going to be. So in order to hit that overall target of conversion and growth, we're going to need to look at every stage of that marketing funnel and turn it into a trackable and optimizable problem. In other words, let's say we're looking at the return on investment by the source of the leads we're driving at the very top of the funnel. We may have a couple different choices in where we can get really qualified potential customers. So if we look at it this way, when the lead comes in at the top of the funnel, we have to close enough of them so that that cost of customer acquisition is lower than the lifetime value. Sounds simple, but what if we're comparing 2 simple sources for leads, Google and Facebook? It's really the math that's going to drive which one we decide is most important. So for example, if Google's AdWords program is driving visitors and 5% of them are becoming free trials for our product, and then 10% of those become customers, we're going to spend $5,000 a customer in that case. On the other hand, let's say we have the same activity on the Facebook side, but only 2% of those folks go to trial, but 20% of them convert into customers. We'll find that the total cost of acquiring that customer is actually about $8,000, so it's much higher. And in this way, we can compare different sources, different channels of leads and marketing, and compare them accurately. It's almost like the Rosetta Stone that allows us to decide which one is the most important. Now that sounds like a pretty simple process. As long as you're tracking everything properly, you'll be able to make accurate decisions. In the beginning, when your growth goals are relatively small, that first month when you're trying to get your first few customers, this may not be that big a challenge. But as you grow at the double-digit rates we associate with high-growth startups, sooner or later you're going to run out of the leads that can come from any one source. And so marketing and sales are going to need to work together to develop new opportunities to bring more leads into that ever-expanding funnel. These are the kinds of levers we look at to make specific operational decisions for growth. So in that case, let's say we've outgrown our initial sources of Google and Facebook. Now we have to decide, how are we going to continue our growth rate? What kinds of operating decisions can this funnel math teach us to make? Well, if we look here, we could simply try to get more people at the top of the funnel. Driving additional top of funnel deal flow, after all, simply requires layering on more sources of leads. We could do that, but what if we run out? Another alternative might be to improve that conversion rate, to get more of the people that we are attracting to turn into customers in the first place. And these operational decisions, whether you decide to expand the pool or just do a better job of closing the deal, both will lead to a lower cost of customer acquisition. This is really the way we decide on how to do more growth. Now, all of this, to be effective, needs to be tracked. So what we're looking at developing then are key performance indicators, metrics that we can track at each stage of this process so that we can translate those into tests that we can run. Tests that we can run to optimize and improve our entire sales funnel. What we're looking at then is potentially tracking on a dashboard the visitors to our website by channel and by source, whether it's Google, Facebook, or just a guy handing out flyers on the street. The important thing is knowing what it costs to get from step to step and our performance on each level. Once we've determined that, we can actually take a moment, step back, and come up with ideas to improve that performance. Now, each of these steps can be optimized, whether it's for a simple advertising campaign, writing better ads, more effective copy. We could create a landing page that does a better job of getting people to click a button or watch a video. Once we do that kind of thought experiment, we've essentially come up with our planning process for strategy and operations for the near future. And each of these things is operationalizing our ideas to do a better and better job of attracting leads. Why do we do this? Well, as Peter Drucker said, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. Of course, there's one problem. He didn't actually say that. He actually said something kind of close, but we'll go with it. The point is, if we measure the right things, if we track the right things, we can actually improve them as well, and this all drops right to the bottom line. So, let's take a look at the levers we can then pull to impact this. We've just spent some time looking at the model, which is tracking the marketing funnel with key performance indicators, and looking for ways to operationally improve the performance along that process. Knowing that there are specific decisions we can make, we need to see what that can be. The first step, of course, is to ensure that our product is in fact delivering customer value. That's how we know we're ready for this stage of growth. And it can be simply entertainment value, like this fidget spinner, which, while not adding a lot of business value, keeps someone occupied and can be very important. So if you're a consumer product, your added value can be entertainment or simply a lifestyle benefit. But if you're looking at a business marketing thing, we have to know whether the value being added is enough to attract those customers. Not only that, we have to effectively communicate it. Now, let's go back to that previous example. Let's say we'd like to improve our marketing process. What does that mean in terms of our operational decision making? Well, the first thing we could do is drive better top of funnel lead flow. To do this, we can either search for more volume, more targeted volume, or lower cost volume. And all of these things can drive into that funnel and let us hit our goals. If we are unable to do that, if we've simply run out of ponds to fish in, as they say, we can go and look to improve our conversion rate. We can focus on making our website more effective at translating those leads into sales. We can do a better job of follow-up and education. Each of these kinds of decisions has an operational implication and can be tested. Let's talk about that in terms of sales. What if we want to improve our sales process? Well, one way to do this is to get more qualified leads. We can do exactly what we were talking about previously and drive more people through this funnel process. This is great. And then we'll have an operational implication there as well. If our marketing team is doing their best to grow that number of leads, we better make sure that we have enough salespeople to take care of all of them. Now, what's really important here is that we're highlighting a very non-intuitive fallout from that operational decision to improve marketing. If we're going to do a better job of generating leads, we're going to need to start hiring people probably 2 days ago. The important thing for a growth company is that your aggressive growth cycles and aggressive growth targets are going to have real implications on things as diverse as human resources. So in this case, we may have to start hiring more salespeople in advance of hitting these aggressive sales goals. And that, in turn, has some implications for capital as well. We could, of course, try to do better with what we have. And that might be a decision to do better at perhaps training our salespeople or hiring more senior folks with better talent to do the sales process. Again, improving the productivity per sales rep as we see here. Each of these decisions can be used operationally to impact our goals, but they have wildly different approaches in terms of their operational impact. Now, as we do this, we could take other approaches as well. Perhaps we've simply run out of sources of new leads. How are we going to continue to grow our revenue? Well, one way might be to improve our account management and grow by the proverbial land and expand method. If you've already got customers, Perhaps the best way for growth is to get them to buy more frequently, and maybe buy more expensive products or additional products from our product line. This way, we can grow the lifetime value of our customers directly without having to simply expand the pool coming in at the top of the funnel. Again, a specific operational and growth impact that comes from looking at our revenue goals and translating them back into marketing and sales targets that have operational implications. Finally, lifetime value, we should point out, can grow with pricing, with reducing churn, and many other things that are also operational decisions. So if you have a product and you select a pricing model that grows as your customer's usage does, your growth can be dependent on simply keeping your customer more engaged. This is a very different challenge than finding new customers. Perhaps your new salespeople would be better spent in hiring people to help your customers engage and develop with the product. Another possibility is churn. If you're losing customers, those customers need to be replaced. In the beginning, for a small startup, you're growing so fast that that proverbial leaky bucket doesn't really impact your growth rate. But as you become larger and larger, losing a small but definite percentage of your customers every month is a virtual impossibility to replace. And so closing that gap can also be a critical thing. And then finally, when you're looking at your customers, the people who already support you and believe in your product, finding ways to expand and provide them greater value and make greater dollars from each account can also be an excellent way to grow that lifetime value. Again, these are all small but important operational implications, but what they add up to are specific things that can increase your growth rate, reduce your costs, and ultimately increase the lifetime value of each customer. These micro blocks build up to the very aggressive growth targets that most startups have. And ultimately, each little small amount of optimization can have a much, much bigger impact down the road, down the funnel and down the road. Let's take a look at what we mean then by talking about this whole growth process. Our organizational goal needs to be optimizing the entire funnel. This means taking the entire sales and conversion process and thinking at each step along the way, what can we do differently? What specific operational action can we take or test to see if we can improve those metrics we're tracking? Each of these, if successful, can add up to a better and better process from reaching our goals. So marketing, sales, product, and customer success all have to work together to map each step of this process and pick the right metrics to track and succeed. And frankly, once you get this done, it's simply a status of rinse and repeat. Do it again and again until you find the methods that work the best. So this is really how sales and marketing work hand in hand in planning and reaching the growth goals of any startup or company. And what this allows us to do ultimately is a real radical redefinition of marketing and budgets associated with it. Today's marketing budget is often a set amount of spend that we're allowed to use per period. The traditional way of doing this is a great start, but it's very static and it doesn't really allow you room to grow and aggressively expand, because improvement just makes the budget a little bit more efficient and lets you spend just a little bit more. If we focus instead on the ultimate output here, which is keeping that lifetime value higher than that acquisition cost, lowering the cost or raising the value actually impacts the decisions we can make by providing a wider range of profitable alternatives and things we can do to acquire customers. The improvement increases your pool of options, so it's a nonlinear process. Getting your customer acquisition costs down allows you to go to different channels that might have a higher cost to acquire but can still be profitable with a higher LTV. In other words, all this optimization doesn't just make you more efficient, it expands your pool of options and makes it possible to hit those aggressive growth targets as you expand to and fill your existing sources of potential customers. So when you're looking at this from a perspective of what can I do today? If I've got a startup I'm looking at and trying to determine what the best path is to reach my aggressive goals, I'm going to need to take a look at my business model. Have I selected the right model? Do I know what the levers are to move to hit those growth targets? Well, those growth targets are measured by key performance indicators, measurable metrics that are driving that financial model of growth. Once we see these, we can map them operationally back to our growth plan, the exact decisions we just discussed. Which channel for advertising? Which focus to spend our time on? Is it retaining customers or doing a better job of sales. We can then benchmark these against the existing companies out there and see if this makes sense in terms of our industry or business. And finally, test and verify to see if this makes sense in the way we're doing business. Once we know the true metrics as we see them, we can put them back into the model and repeat the process. We'll take a look at some specific examples during the Q&A process, but now I think it's time for us to take a moment and ask some questions.
Jeremy, thank you so much. That was a lot of great information for us, and we have a bunch of questions that came in. Would you like to answer some of those?
I'd be thrilled.
Great. So our first question is from Daniel. A recurrent issue is when to pivot or not to pivot. Even we here in the second phase of a startup. How do you link the key decision to pivot to another value proposition or concept to these metrics? That sounds like Shakespeare, to pivot or not to pivot.
Yeah,
Right?
that is the question. No, that's
the
actually a
question,
great
yeah.
question. And I know we just ran through quite a lot of material very quickly, but what shouldn't be lost there is that's exactly what the process we're describing is about. Pivoting is only really something you do when you realize that one of your assumptions, one of the numbers you're striving to reach just can't be done. You have to change the model in order to make one that works. So while your value proposition may be strong, people want your product. It's pricing it, it's figuring out the way to get customers. These are the critical operational decisions that'll make you actually have a growth business. So let's say, for example, someone started out thinking we're going to have a freemium model. We're going to offer a product for free, and then some of those customers will want to buy the higher priced, more expensive version that will lead to our growth. Well, if you're just not seeing the conversion at those levels, it might be time to rethink that and say perhaps what we need here is instead a free trial. And the way to test that is simply to put a free trial version out there and see whether the overall conversion leads to a higher LTV for the whole process. So that's just a very specific example for that question. But the entire startup process when you're looking at growth is about testing and validating the metrics along the way to prove that you can keep going to profitability.
Constant testing.
Yes.
Constant process.
Yes, exactly.
Right. All right. The second question is from Brian. Why is growth marketing so important in the startup world?
Well, this is a great thing because this is what I do. So I'm very happy that we now have a reason that growth marketers are on the rise. I think really what's happening here is we're seeing a world where, thanks to Amazon Web Services and even stores like, or companies rather, like Shopify that allow you to set up an e-commerce store for 10, 20 bucks a month, we're seeing that the costs associated with things like the infrastructure and the technology aspects of a business are really almost commoditized. And what's going to differentiate your business against competitors who also maybe have venture capital money, a really good idea, is really their ability to brand and market effectively to the target customer. That's a combination of not just designing a great product and a place to sell it, so your website experience and your product design, great branding, but also the exact methods by which you reach that target audience. What makes a difference between two companies in the same space is often the unique combination that unlocks that door.
And do you think there's an absolute answer for that?
Well, it's really going to depend on everyone's specific vertical, so there's no absolute answer, but the bottom line is there are very similar companies that start out of the gate looking exactly alike. But what we see from a model of growth like this, when you're tracking the right things, is even a slight difference in some of these metrics at the beginning. When you project these 60 months out of double-digit growth, you're looking at companies with two vastly different outcomes.
Right, great. All right, so next question is from Stephanie. Are these kinds of models appropriate for all business? This is a good question because we have, a very large cross-section of businesses who are watching today, so if you can answer that.
Well, it's an excellent question. One of the things that's really most easy to do is to really fall into the trap of focusing just on digital businesses because we can track it so easily. But that's not a requirement. This can apply to any business. The real question you have to ask yourself is, can I effectively track the things I need to review and then optimize? And if you can't, that's okay. No one else will be able to either. But the real strength of digital businesses and things like software as a service or subscription commerce is that almost all of these numbers are simply critical path. Your churn rate, your acquisition cost, your ability to grow, and they're testable on a cohort by cohort, characteristic by characteristic basis, all the way through the marketing funnel.
Okay, great. And one of our last questions here from Dennis. How do you determine these KPI if your business hasn't launched yet?
This is a question that comes up all the time in our Launch Your Startup classes and a lot of our other programs for our own entrepreneurs. And that is actually, the crux of it is find comparable companies, industry standard metrics. Great sources for that are industry players like MailChimp, for example, have wonderful data on things like email open rates and conversion rates across lots of similar businesses. You can get data about mature companies, for example, in the cloud and SaaS space, from their S1s or other SEC filings. And there are many people who have already put together similar models like this, and they can give you the sort of rules of thumb that apply to business models and startups alike. And what's great is with those kinds of targets, you can work your way backwards and figure out what you need to do now to look like the successful players in 5-10 years.
Great. So, this is a lot of information, a lot of great information. What would you say, what's the first thing you suggest to somebody? What's the first thing that they should do out of the gate?
Well, if you're running a startup, it's often easy to think you're going to set up all the tracking and metrics and measurement later. But the important thing is not to be scared and say, well, we're not really good right now. We're not where we're going to be. You're never going to be where you want to be as a startup owner. You're always going to be a little bit behind the eight ball and thinking of your future product that's going to be even better. But the important thing to remember is it's actually a good thing to start tracking early. Because when you start tracking your not so good version that's just getting out there, it gives you a very reasonable baseline to measure against. So if you know, well, today, even though the product's not quite done and it doesn't look as good as it's going to look one day, we're converting 10% of the people, then it's not unthinkable to think you could increase that to 12 or 15 or more. So this gives you a great way to get started. So the first advice then is put all the tracking in, put your Google Analytics in, put your mobile SDK in to make sure you understand what's happening. Whatever your business is, understand where people are converting and where they're falling out of the funnel.
Right. And would you say in the process, over your experience over the years, what is the section or component that you've seen people struggle with the most?
That's a difficult one. I think the challenge for many founders is to really not pivot completely, but to let go of some of the cherished beliefs they have that just turn out to not be true. And often that's because of initial success with a group of early adopters who really like something about a product, but it's not really the mainstream part that's going to have mass success. So it's also, a challenge to many people to not always listen to their customers. And while we're taught many times in sort of this customer development philosophy, listen to what your customers are telling you. They're telling you what they want. There's also a lot of people who say, well, customers don't know what they don't know. They don't know if you have a completely new product, they're not really aware it's there. Right. So remember, there's something of an education process too, and don't be discouraged.
For the person who, but
for
the
a completely
customer
new
also.
product, yeah. I mean, there's something to be said that if you ask people what else they'd like, they'll tell you.
Right.
But there's a saying that you'll know what feature is the most important in your product when you take it away.
Right. Right. Yeah. All right. So you have a new book that just came out last week.
About a week and a half ago.
About a week and a half ago. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, it's called Digital Marketing Strategy and Tactics, and it's based on the course I've actually taught at Columbia for almost 10 years. Right. The players have changed. It's no longer MySpace and social media, but if you're interested in the digital media course or would like to talk to me about it, I'd welcome anybody emailing me.
What would you say the core message of the book?
Well, that digital marketing is always changing, but it's a powerful tool for growth and a critical one today for any business.
Great. And any just final, before we round up, we've got about a minute left, any final key takeaways for everybody? If you wanted to sum this up, what are the key takeaways?
Well, I think what's great about thinking of marketing as a living, breathing thing you can test and learn and operationalize is we're now able to take these financial models we often do, particularly as MBAs, and turn it into real-world operational decisions. Right. It's hard to realize that saying we're going to grow at X rate means we have to hire 20 salespeople this quarter. Those are the real-world implications of growth. So I think looking through this lens really allows you to take a dose of reality for every startup that is often very much needed.
I like this because it really goes back to a webinar we hosted last month with Professor Willie Peterson. It's a living organization. Yeah. It must be a living, it must be repeatable. It's very energetic. to an organization to have that sort of process that is not just a one-time process, but a living process that keeps moving on. That seems to be a real theme among many of our webinars.
Absolutely. I think the greatest thing about the fact we're in such an age of quantitative metrics and tracking is we don't have to have arguments about who's right. We can just look at the numbers. If we're doing that part properly, if we think about it just as a giant high school science experiment, I'm going to try this in my business, and here's what I expect is going to happen.
Right.
And a month later, we should know whether it worked.
And it's easier and easier to get the data.
Absolutely.
I mean, these days, there's really no excuse anymore.
In fact, as people watching this probably can agree with, there's almost too much information coming at you like a fire.
Yes,
right?
exactly. Yes, exactly. All right. Well, thank you so much, Jeremy, for being with us today, and thank you for all joining us, especially those of you at the Association for Talent Development International Conference and Expo in San Diego. Jeremy.
Thank you very much, and we wish we were there.
Thank you.